They called me home crying about Dad's heart attack. I rushed over, only to be ambushed with papers to sign away my money. I pretended to sign, but then dropped Bombshell that left everyone speechless. You should have seen their faces. I, 28M, got the call at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. My sister's voice was hysterical, barely coherent through the sobbing. Dad had collapsed at home, she said. Heart attack. The paramedics were working on him. I needed to come home immediately. I hadn't spoken to my family in 3 years. Not since the blowout over my inheritance from Grandpa, the one they tried to convince me to share equally, even though he'd specifically left everything to me. I'd moved across the country after that, started fresh, built my own life. But hearing about Dad's condition, all that anger melted away instantly. I threw clothes into a bag and caught the first flight out. During the 6-hour journey, I kept thinking about our last conversation. How he'd called me selfish for not giving my siblings their fair share of Grandpa's money. How I'd hung up on him. The guilt was eating me alive. My brother picked me up from the airport. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he kept thanking me for coming home. We drove straight to the family house, the same one I'd grown up in, with its peeling paint and overgrown garden. Mom was waiting on the porch, and when she saw me, she broke down crying again. She told me Dad was stable now, resting at the hospital, but the doctors said it had been close. Too close. The whole family had been shaken to their core, she said. It made them realize how precious family was, how stupid their fighting had been. She apologized for everything that had happened 3 years ago. I felt the walls I'd built around my heart starting to crumble. Maybe this tragedy would bring us all back together. Maybe we could be a real family again. That evening, we all gathered in the living room. Me, Mom, my sister, my brother, and his wife. They'd ordered pizza, and for a moment, it felt like old times. We shared stories about Dad, laughed about his terrible jokes, cried about how scared we'd all been. Then my sister cleared her throat. She said there was something important we needed to discuss while we were all together. Something Dad had been worried about before his attack. My brother nodded gravely and pulled out a manila folder. He explained that Dad had been stressed about finances lately. The medical bills were going to be enormous, and they didn't have good insurance. The house needed major repairs they couldn't afford. Mom's arthritis was getting worse, and she'd need care soon. My sister jumped in, saying they'd all been talking, and they knew I was doing well financially. They'd heard through mutual friends that my tech startup had taken off, that I was making good money now. They were hoping, praying, that I might consider helping the family through this difficult time. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, but I pushed it down. This was different. This was about Dad's health, about keeping the family together during a crisis. My brother's wife, who'd always been the practical one, said they'd consulted with a lawyer to make everything official and fair. They'd drawn up papers that would establish a family trust, where I'd contribute a significant amount. They suggested $200,000 to start, and they'd all be beneficiaries. It would help with Dad's medical costs, house repairs, and Mom's future care needs. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. Nearly half of what I'd managed to save and invest over the past 3 years of working 18-hour days. My sister must have seen my expression because she quickly added that they knew it was a lot to ask. But family was everything, and Dad had always taught us to take care of each other. She started crying again, saying she couldn't bear the thought of losing Dad because they couldn't afford proper treatment. Mom reached over and took my hand. She said she knew they'd hurt me before, but this was different. This was life and death. She promised that if I helped them now, they'd never ask for anything again. The family would be whole again, and Dad would be so proud. My brother slid the papers across the coffee table. He said they'd already had everything prepared by their lawyer, just in case I agreed. All I needed to do was sign, and they could set up the trust immediately. Time was crucial, he emphasized. Dad's treatment couldn't wait. I stared at the documents. The legal language was dense, but I could make out the key points. I would be contributing $200,000 initially, with provisions for additional contributions as needed. The trust would be managed by my siblings, with Mom as the primary beneficiary. Something felt wrong. The timing, the prepared papers, the way they'd orchestrated this whole conversation. But then I looked at Mom's tear-stained face, thought about Dad lying in a hospital bed, and felt ashamed for being suspicious. I asked if I could read through everything carefully first. My brother said of course, but he hoped I'd understand that every day we delayed was another day Dad might not get the treatment he needed. The stress of financial worry was probably what had triggered his heart attack in the first place. I took the papers to my old bedroom and spread them out on the desk where I used to do homework. As I read through each page, that knot in my stomach grew tighter. The language was very specific about my contributions, but vague about how the money would be used. There were clauses about family maintenance and general welfare that seemed to go far beyond medical expenses. But what really caught my attention was a small paragraph near the end. It mentioned that the trust would also serve to equitably redistribute family assets and correct previous inequitable distributions. It was legal speak, but I knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't just about Dad's medical bills. This was another attempt to get their hands on Grandpa's inheritance. I sat there for a long time, staring at those papers. Part of me wanted to believe this was legitimate, that my family really had changed, that Dad's heart attack had made them realize what was important. But the evidence was right there in black and white. I thought about calling the hospital to check on Dad's condition, but something stopped me. Instead, I pulled out my phone and did some research. I found the hospital's website, looked up their visiting hours, their patient information policies. Then I called the main number. I asked to be connected to Dad's room, saying I was his son calling from out of town. The nurse who answered was confused. She told me they didn't have any patient by that name. I gave her Dad's full name, his approximate age, said he'd been admitted for a heart attack. She checked again, then told me there was no one by that name in their cardiac unit or anywhere else in the hospital. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I called 2 other hospitals in the area. Same result. No record of my father being admitted anywhere. The betrayal hit me in waves. Not only had they lied about Dad's condition, but they'd manipulated my emotions, my guilt, my love for my family to try to steal my money. Again, I sat on my childhood bed, surrounded by old posters and trophies, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. They played me perfectly. The crying phone call, the airport pickup, Mom's tears on the porch. It had all been an act. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was still the same naive kid who'd trust family blindly. They hadn't counted on me doing my homework. I spent the next hour making phone calls and doing research. I contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in fraud cases. I documented everything, the phone calls, the fake emergency, the papers they'd tried to get me to sign. I even recorded a video on my phone, explaining the situation and showing the documents, just in case I needed evidence later. Then I came up with a plan. I went back downstairs where my family was waiting anxiously. I sat down and told them I'd read through everything, and I understood how serious the situation was. I said I wanted to help Dad and the family, even though it would be a significant financial sacrifice for me. My sister started crying with relief. My brother clasped my shoulder and said he knew I'd come through for the family. Mom hugged me and whispered that Dad would be so grateful when he woke up. I picked up the pen and held it over the signature line. Then I paused and said I had just one question. I asked when exactly I'd be able to visit Dad at the hospital. The room went quiet. My brother cleared his throat and said the doctors weren't allowing visitors yet, that Dad needed complete rest. My sister nodded quickly, adding that the ICU was very strict about family visits. I nodded understandingly and asked which hospital he was at, since I'd like to send flowers or maybe speak with his doctor about his prognosis. I watched their faces carefully as they exchanged glances. My brother's wife said she thought it was General Hospital, but my sister corrected her, saying it was actually St. Mary's. Mom looked confused and said she thought it was the Regional Medical Center. I smiled and told them not to worry about the details. I was sure I'd figure out where to send the flowers. Then I signed the papers with a flourish. The relief in the room was palpable. They were all smiles and hugs, talking about how this would save Dad's life, how proud he'd be, how we were finally a real family again. I handed the papers back to my brother and told them I was exhausted from traveling and needed to get some sleep. I'd handle the bank transfers in the morning, I said. They were all understanding, saying of course I needed rest after such an emotional day. I went upstairs and waited. Around midnight, I heard them talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. They were celebrating. My brother was saying he couldn't believe I'd actually fallen for it again. My sister was laughing about how easy it had been to fake cry on the phone. Mom was already talking about how they'd split the money. My brother's wife was the voice of caution, saying they needed to be careful about how they spent it, that I might get suspicious if I saw them making big purchases too quickly. My sister said not to worry. Once the money was in the trust, there was nothing I could do about it legally. I'd heard enough. I went back to my room and set my alarm for 6 a.m. The next morning, I came downstairs to find my brother already up, coffee in hand, looking eager to get the financial transfer started. He asked if I'd slept well, said he'd been too excited to sleep much himself, thinking about how this would help Dad recover. I told him I'd slept great, and I was ready to take care of the money transfer. But first, I said, I wanted to visit Dad at the hospital. I'd brought some of his favorite books to read to him, and I thought it might help with his recovery. My brother's smile faltered slightly. He reminded me that the doctors weren't allowing visitors yet. I nodded and said I understood, but I called the hospital that morning, and they told me visiting hours started at 8 a.m. for immediate family. The color drained from his face. My sister, who'd just walked into the kitchen, asked what we were talking about. I explained that I was planning to visit Dad before we handled the financial stuff. My sister quickly jumped in, saying that Dad was actually being transferred to a different hospital today for specialized treatment. She wasn't sure which one yet, but she'd call me when she knew more. I smiled and told them that was interesting, because when I called St. Mary's, General Hospital, and the Regional Medical Center last night, none of them had any record of Dad being admitted. The kitchen went dead silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, my brother's coffee cup rattling slightly as his hand shook. Mom walked in at that moment, asking cheerfully if we were ready to help Dad with his medical bills. The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked around at all of them. These people who'd raised me, who I'd loved unconditionally for most of my life, who'd just tried to steal from me using the most manipulative lie imaginable. I told them I had some news that might surprise them. I'd done some research after signing the papers last night, and I discovered something interesting about family trusts and fraud. My brother asked what I meant, his voice barely above a whisper. I explained that when someone uses false pretenses to obtain money, like faking a medical emergency, it's considered fraud. And when family members conspire together to commit fraud, it becomes a federal crime with serious jail time. I pulled out my phone and showed them the video I'd recorded the night before, explaining their scheme and showing the fraudulent documents. I told them I'd already sent copies to my lawyer and had documented evidence of their entire plan. My sister started to say something, but I held up my hand. I wasn't finished. I told them that the papers they'd had me sign weren't actually legal documents. I'd had my lawyer friend review them remotely, and they were full of errors and missing crucial elements that would make them unenforceable. Apparently, their lawyer had done a pretty sloppy job. But here was the really interesting part, I continued. Even if the documents had been legitimate, they wouldn't have mattered, because I hadn't actually signed them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pen, a different pen from the one I'd used the night before. This one had special ink that disappeared after 12 hours. I'd bought it years ago as a novelty item and never thought I'd actually use it. I suggested they take a look at their precious documents now. My brother grabbed the papers with shaking hands. Where my signature had been the night before, there was now just blank space. All their evidence that I'd agreed to their scheme had literally vanished. The look on their faces was everything I'd hoped for and more. Shock, disbelief, fear, and dawning realization that they'd been completely outplayed. But I still wasn't done. I told them I'd spent the early morning hours doing more research. I'd found some very interesting information about the family finances. It turned out that Dad was perfectly healthy. I'd actually called his doctor's office and confirmed he'd had a routine checkup just last week with perfect results. More interesting was what I'd discovered about the house. They'd been telling me it needed major repairs, but I'd found the recent property assessment online. The house was actually in excellent condition and had appreciated significantly in value. In fact, they'd recently taken out a second mortgage on it. I'd also found some social media posts from my sister's family vacation to Europe last month and my brother's new truck parked in the driveway. Purchases that seemed inconsistent with their claims of financial hardship. My brother's wife tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. She asked what I wanted from them. I told them what I wanted was simple. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't the naive kid they remembered. I'd learned from our last encounter, and I'd grown up. I also wanted them to know that I had enough evidence to pursue criminal charges if I chose to. Conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, since they'd involved Mom in their scheme, and a few other charges my lawyer had mentioned. But I wasn't going to do that. Instead, I was going to give them a gift. I was going to walk away and never contact them again. I was going to pretend this never happened, and they were going to do the same. They would never call me, never ask me for money, never try to manipulate me again. In return, I wouldn't destroy their lives with criminal charges. Mom finally found her voice and asked if we couldn't work this out as a family. She said they'd made mistakes, but family was supposed to forgive each other. I looked at her. This woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about right and wrong, who'd just participated in an elaborate scheme to steal from her own son, and felt nothing but sadness. I told her that family was supposed to love and protect each other, not lie and steal. They'd made their choice when they decided to fake Dad's heart attack to manipulate me. Now I was making mine. I went upstairs, packed my bag, and called a cab to the airport. As I waited on the porch, my siblings came out to try one more time to convince me to stay, to work things out. My brother said they'd been desperate, that they really did need money, that maybe they'd gone about it the wrong way, but their intentions were good. I told him that good intentions didn't fake heart attacks. Good intentions didn't manipulate grief and guilt to steal money. Good intentions didn't involve elaborate lies and fraudulent documents. The cab arrived, and I loaded my bag. As I got in, I looked back at the house where I'd grown up, at the family that had shaped me, and felt a strange sense of peace. They'd tried to use my love for them against me, but instead, They'd freed me from any remaining obligation I felt toward them. They'd shown me exactly who they really were, and I finally believed them. Update 1. It's been 6 months since I left that house, and I haven't heard from any of them. I changed my phone number and moved to a new apartment, just to be safe. My lawyer friend helped me put some additional protections in place for my assets, in case they try something else in the future. I've been going to therapy to work through the betrayal and manipulation. It's helped me understand that what they did wasn't just about money. It was about power and control. They couldn't stand that I'd become successful without them, that I'd moved on and built a life they couldn't touch. The hardest part has been accepting that the family I thought I had never really existed. The people who raised me were capable of elaborate deception and emotional manipulation. That's a hard truth to live with. But I've also found something unexpected: peace. For the first time in years, I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop, not wondering when they'll call with the next crisis or demand. I'm free to build relationships based on genuine care and respect, not obligation and guilt. I've started dating someone new, and when I told her about my family situation, she didn't try to convince me to reconcile or suggest that blood is thicker than water. She just listened and supported my decision to protect myself. That's what real love looks like. Update 2. A year later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my brother's wife, calling to tell me that my parents were getting divorced. Apparently, the stress of their failed scheme had caused them to turn on each other. Dad had found out about Mom's involvement and felt betrayed. Mom blamed Dad for not stopping the others from involving her. She said the family was falling apart, and maybe if I came back, I could help fix things. I told her I was sorry to hear about their problems, but I wasn't interested in being their solution. Then I hung up and blocked that number too. I realized that even their crisis was probably another manipulation, another attempt to draw me back in. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd built a new life, surrounded myself with people who valued honesty and integrity. I was finally, truly free. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for what they did. Their betrayal taught me to trust my instincts, to value myself enough to walk away from toxic relationships, even family ones. It showed me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. They called me home crying about Dad's heart attack, thinking they could manipulate me one more time. Instead, they gave me the greatest gift possible, the truth about who they really were, and the freedom to choose who I wanted to be.